Welcome to the Living Yoga Podcast. My name is Darren Main, and today we're going to have an amazing conversation with Jacoby Ballard. Jacoby is the author of A Queer Dharma. He's a phenomenal yoga teacher and an inspirational activist. We're going to be talking all about the intersection of queer politics, queer spirituality, and of course, queer activism. It's a really inspiring conversation, and I'm excited to share it with you. I've posted links to all the relevant resources we discuss in this podcast, including Jacoby's website and book, so you can reach out to him or purchase the book if you'd like to. You can also follow him on social media. I've also posted a brand new free video course. It's free for a limited time for viewers and listeners of this podcast. I've posted a link to it in the show notes. You can also find it at my website. It's Mindfulness for Busy Minds. So if you want to learn how to meditate, maybe you've tried before and found it really difficult, it's free for a limited time, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. Again, you can find the links to that in the show notes as well as on my website, darrenmain.com. So all of that out of the way, let's dive into this inspiring conversation with Jacoby Ballard. We've been chatting back and forth online, and I've been aware of your work for a while. And I knew your book was eventually, there's that gestation period where you're writing and galleys and all of that. So I've sort of been aware your book is coming for a year or so, 6 months, I don't know, right. Somewhere in that mess that was the pandemic. And I'm just really, really excited to be chatting with you about it and to know that it's out there in the world. Before we dive into that, I would like to talk a little bit about you, your journey, your work, what that looks like. How did you become the teacher you are today? And how did you get to the point of writing A Queer Dharma?
Sure. Yeah. I think most people enter their practice through duress, through some kind of desperation, some kind of living through harm. And so my meditation, I started the whole yoga practice with meditation, which is a big part of yoga, even though we usually think of yoga as just the asana. I started meditating in high school as a senior project, and I was bullied from the 7th grade through high school and lived in a small town in Colorado. And it kept me alive, meditating and learning that there's something inside that can't be extinguished or even tampered with by all my bullies. So that's how it started. And, when you pick up something that saves your life, I think there's going to be some commitment there. And then in college, there's a wellness credit that we had to fulfill. And I waited to the very last minute until I got an email from the registrar that said that you must register for yoga with Lillian McMullen. And so I did. And she's this 70-year-old woman, and she taught yoga as the whole Raja Yoga path. And she herself had been her life had been turned upside down by yoga practice in all the good ways. And learning from a 70-year-old, versus learning from a 20-year-old is really different. And I feel really grateful that I met her at that point in her life. I think what was compelling for me then about asana was that her 70-year-old body could do things that my 20-year-old body just was confounded by. What? Balance on your hands? What are you talking about? Are you going to break something, Lillian? And she just had a grace and a courage and a wisdom to her. So those are the foundational moments that stuck with me. I'll also say that during high school, not only did I survive bullying, but I was a 3-sport athlete, and it made my game stronger. I became an unstoppable free throw shooter because I could focus and block everything else out. So, it helped me do what I was already doing better and become more skillful. So that gave me a faith in the practice that has continued through this day. All the tough moments in my life, I bring it to the mat, I bring it to the cushion, and the yoga practice holds me through it, whether it's getting fired for being trans, or dealing with drama in activist communities, or going through difficulties with my family. That's some of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question for you, and I think it's sort of all the questions I'm going to ask you. I think these are some of the most important, because I think words, they can be used in so many different ways. And like just the title of your book, A Queer Dharma, people can use queer as an insult. They can use it as a sort of this inclusive, all the letters of the LGBTQ alphabet,
right.
Or it can be more of a political, like an activist sort of thing. There's lots of different ways that word can be used. And same with Dharma. I mean, Buddhist Dharma is different than yogic Dharma as presented in, say, the Bhagavad Gita.
Right.
And then, of course, we have this whole new litany of words coming out around gender that up until recently didn't really exist, at least not in popular language, but like non-binary, trans man, trans woman, cis man, cis woman. There's all these these words that can mean slightly different things to different people. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could sort of give us your definitions of queer, of dharma, of trans, of any of the other words I mentioned, and where you fit on that spectrum. Both internally as well as in the work you do. Yeah. A small question.
Yeah, I named the book that because of the multiple uses of the words, and so that like the title of the book could have all these different meanings. Queer started as like a word that meant like weird or bizarre, right? And then became vilified, and then was reclaimed through Queer Nation. By LGBTQ communities, and now is an identity that lots of us hold really proudly. To me, it doesn't equal LGBTQ. It is a political identity that also involves being anti-capitalist and anti-racist and anti-oppressive. And striving really towards what the yogic teachings direct us towards being ethical and kind and full of integrity and generous. And then the word dharma, it can mean one's calling, or it can mean the teaching, right? So the title of my book could mean like a bizarre teaching, or a bizarre calling, or calling that is uniquely political, or a teaching that is uniquely political, based on identity and also beyond identity. And then the words, for me, trans.
No, go keep going.
Trans, for me, is like an umbrella term, and within it is many different kinds of identities. I use the word trans man kind of loosely because that can kind of land, and it allows me to land in other people's mind and hearts the way that I want to. And I'm not totally invested in being read as a man, as being even like feeling like 100% a man myself. I see gender as a spectrum, and I'm more on the masculine side of the spectrum, but have lots of questions, about masculinity and the kind of masculinity that I want to live, and the kind of masculinity that's like presented in the world, and that can be really damaging. I also hold the term genderqueer because there's like aspects of my life that would not be typically associated with that of a man, such as I gave birth to a child. And I'm masculine. So there's some and in that it just feels really queer. That there's no specific, you can't pin it down as like this or that.
It's interesting because I lecture on yoga philosophy, and when I talk about the Bhagavad Gita, a big part of that is Arjuna's Dharma, that the reason he's struggling, his despair at the beginning of the book is rooted to the fact that he's not willing to embrace his Dharma.
Yeah.
And of course, at that time, Dharma was dictated by the family you were born into, the caste you were born into. And of course, today we look at something like the caste system as being abhorrent and evil. And yet we still sort of have that today, where if you're born with boy parts, your Dharma is to act a certain way. If you're born with girl parts, your Dharma is to act and be a certain way. And that's fine, I guess, if you align that way, but if you don't, it becomes really problematic internally. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that on a personal level. Like, what was it like? I'm sure you don't live your Dharma perfectly every day, but I'm assuming that you're more in alignment with your truth today than you were at other points in your life.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could talk about that journey just a little bit, about living out of accord with your Dharma and then finding a greater expression of it and what that is like for you.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the early teachings, that my 200-hour yoga teacher trainer, Swami Jaya Devi, offered is that God doesn't make mistakes. And the moment I met her, I was just like grappling with my gender identity and coming to terms with it. I'd been out as queer for a number of years and totally comfortable with that. And changing up my gender presentation was a whole nother level for me. And through that teaching, and I discuss it a lot in the book, I've come to that teaching and my Dharma is like a part of it is a journey through gender. Part of it is being a bridge builder of like kind of this and kind of that, and able to see both sides of things. Another teaching that I discuss in the book is Laverne Cox, a trans leader, has said that we must love what is uniquely trans about us, which is really different than trying to assimilate to be read all the time as a man or read all the time as a cisgender woman.
Yeah.
But to love the experiences in our lives, the aspects of our bodies that make us uniquely trans, feels really defiant and really radical and busting apart the system, the gender binary system that says, you're only lovable if you're this or you're that. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to read something from your book and get you to reflect on it, if you're open to that.
Sure.
Okay. I'm trying out for the narrator for your audiobook, actually, here. I'm kidding.
Right.
So I highlighted so much of your book. It's embarrassing. It would be easier to read the things I didn't highlight. So, but I picked out a few things here. You write, my queer and trans identities deeply influenced my experience of yogic and Buddhist teachings, for I experienced both my identity and teachings as political. And that resonates with me because I really believe that karma yoga, action in the world, is essential, right? It's not just about what you do on your yoga mat or your meditation cushion, it's what you do in the world. And yet so much of politics, activism, taking a stand in the world for what you believe to be right, comes by, it can be awkward, it can be icky, it can be uncomfortable. It can be anger-inducing. I mean, watching the evening news is not exactly like a trip to the day spa. And so I'm wondering how you balance those two, that need to find your center and your Zen and grow spiritually and do the inner work, and doing the work in the world, which is just feels inherently conflicted at times.
Yeah, I see them as kind of like two pieces of a locket that go together, right? That like I go out into the world and try to work on issues of injustice, because of who I love, and because my heart leads me there, and because I want to protect and cherish all the different forms of life. And then, going out to the world is like, it's a lot, or turning on the news, it can be a lot, and it stirs something in the body, heart, and mind. And so then I bring that back to my mat, right? And I can work on like discharging the anger. I can work on forgiving how things have been and how things are, so that I can work on using that energy towards imagination and vision, rather than struggling against the existing reality. So it feels to me like this, both are essential. Like I have more material to work with the more that I go out into the world and put myself in uncomfortable positions, or, let my heart break. And then with that broken heart, I bring it back to the mat and to the cushion to mend it, and to the teachings. So I think of the Dharma in a Buddhist sense as like the river of teachings that holds my life and your life and all of our lives. That can hold all of it, all of the complexity of being human. So I surrender myself, and then through that, the strength and courage and resilience that my practice gives me, then I go back out, right? And I found that both are essential, and I've worked with so many different social movement organizations and activists that are depleted, right? That like need some rest and need some replenishment. So that like coming back to the mat, coming back into prayer, coming back into practice, so important to continue to go out and do the work around homelessness, or around climate change, or police brutality, that we have to like resource ourselves and nourish ourselves. And then I think we can't just get stuck there. We can't just get stuck on our mat, because we're human and we're in relationship inevitably. And hopefully, my friend Hala Corey says that we know that our practice is working when our relationships are getting better. And I've felt that in political relationships too, that when all the people of an organization or movement have their own spiritual practice and spiritual teacher to turn to, then it makes the movement stronger, because we're all doing our personal work, and then we're all showing up together. And it's this beautiful flow. But if we're not doing the personal work, then we're going to like battle against each other, and create splits in our movement, splits in our organization, splits in our household. But we can't just stay on the mat, because that would be irresponsible. There's like an unimaginable suffering happening in the world that I think our practice calls us to.
I don't know if this is because technology enables us to see more and share more, or if it's actually that somebody turned up the heat on the stove and the pot is boiling more. But it seems like we live in a world that is, it's just so easy to attack people online, to organize it, both in good ways for, a just cause, but then there's people showing up and screaming at the, the Board of Education in these towns because they're trying to protect kids, and not just expressing their disagreement, but just really threatening, hostile ways. I'm wondering how you personally address that, because I'm sure as a trans man, you get an earful online and probably in the real world as well. But people are just, it seems like it's getting worse. And maybe that's just, I'll mix some cliches, but like it's darkest just before the dawn, and there's this big dawn of enlightenment coming, and the darkness is just kicking and fighting. That's what I'm going to go with, because it gets me through the night. But it's hard to hear that. I get some of it, but I know others get more of it. Yeah. Right. And I'm wondering, how do you address that and stay in your loving kindness? Yeah. Or do you not?
I mean, I'm human like everyone else, and it's part of the human experience to experience anger. And I have come to the understanding that that's just going to happen. I can't bury anger. I can't push it aside, dismiss it, because then it's just going to get stronger. if it's like under the carpet. But I also know from my own experience and through the experience of lots of others that do this work, that if I speak from that place of anger, if I act from that place of anger, that it's not going to be well received, right? I know from like studying neurobiology that like we as humans read each other's tone and body language so much sooner than the words land in our minds. And so if I'm coming at you, Darren, with anger, you're going to see that and be threatened. Whereas like if I let the wave of anger rise in me, and maybe I write it out, maybe I write the email or write the Facebook post, but don't send it. So I let it be expressed, but not in a dangerous way. And then also I've learned like through my body to like stomp it out, kick it out, yell it out, scream it out, drum it out, to move. And I think that's one of the gifts of asana, that we're like discharging that energy through our body so it doesn't get stuck within us. One of my friends, Kate Johnson, has said, to think of 3 reasons why someone might be doing or acting the way they are. And that has helped humanize me. Like maybe this person is attacking me because they have a trans child and they're really scared for them. Maybe they're attacking me because their own mother left their family to be in a lesbian relationship, and then the family was in poverty. Or, just like thinking of like there could be really good reasons or humanizing reasons why someone's attacking me. And in that, to like trust everyone's basic goodness and act from that place. And I think my spiritual practice has led me to call people in to like have the hard conversation directly and with kindness when I'm ready, when the anger has moved through me, rather than attack someone online. On all those online attacks, there's often little relationship between people. And, we know through time that when we don't have relationship with other humans, it makes it so much easier to dehumanize them, right? We see that in the history of our own country. But when like Black folks and white folks are in relationship with each other, then or queer folks and straight folks, or refugees and people that were born and raised in the country, we see each other as human. We notice the things that we have in common, like, oh, you have a sister named Florence, I have a sister named Florence, or you like okra, I like okra. Inevitably, there's something that we have in common. And so I try to, as a proactive practice, I try to look for those things, even in, difficult political figures that show up, of like trying to like refuse to allow my heart to hate, because that's a dangerous way of being for the heart to get into.
Yeah. Are you a Star Wars fan by any chance?
I'm not, but I'm proximate to it.
Okay. The Emperor Palpatine is like the evil dictator. That's all you really need to know. And in several scenes throughout the series, he taunts the Jedi, Luke Skywalker, Anakin, at different points, and he's like, I can feel your anger. You want to strike me down, and as soon as you do your journey, the dark side will be complete. And I feel like there are certain people that are really, their goal is not to change your mind, but to get you angry, agitated, because that's where they get their power from. Yeah. And we see that like with bombastic Twitter posts, and it's almost like they're not trying to convince you of the rightness of their point of view, but rather just, let me just throw this turd in the punch bowl and watch everybody react to it as I sort of feed off that energy. Anyway, I digress. I'm a Star Wars fan. What can I say? So what you were just saying is a great segue to something else I'd like to read from your book. And in this, I'm not going to read the whole thing because I want people to read your book, but you are at a workshop with Sean Korn, who is a wonderful yoga teacher who started off the mat into the world, which is really about what we're talking about, taking what we do on the yoga mat and making change in the world. And she's a really wonderful, empowering teacher in that regard. And you write, in a training of more than 60 people, we were all asked the question in small groups, what breaks your heart? I answered with a shaky voice, all that my community endures and inflicts again on itself. I was thinking about Dharma in my community, the struggles over politics, love, incarceration, abuse, when the system is designed to, quote, help, often perpetuate more harm. The harassment we endure for dressing how we do or holding hands with a lover. I was thinking about the unemployment rates among trans people. I was thinking about homicides, suicides of queer and trans people, and how routinely they arrive in my newsfeed, inbox, or voicemail. And you go on, Sean Korn reflected to me on this moment that I hold so much for my students and want to protect them from going through what I have gone through. She noticed some martyr qualities and told me that this way of being was unsustainable. She told me that not only can I hold all of this for my vast community, but that not only that I... I just lost... you're never going to have me narrate your book now. She told me that not only can I not hold this for my vast community, but that it's not healthy to even try. As we spoke with 60 onlookers, she helped me uncover the rage in my belly and burning in my temples. I jut my chin back, shut off my voice, and hold it all in. I have probably been doing this for a long time, not knowing how to safely express anger at injustice and afraid of the grief underneath the rage. That really hit me because that was my story for the longest time. And my question is this. Yay, Sean Korn. She was absolutely right. But B, we do have anger, we do have rage, and it's justified. I think there's this really unhealthy thing in the yoga world where it's like, namaste, it's all peace, love, and granola. And yes, we should strive for that. That's not like an inherently bad thing. But anger is there for a reason, just like your hand on a hot stove burns for a reason. Yeah. Right? It's there to teach you something, to say, hey, look here. But then we can get caught up in the anger and rage. And so what is the middle path? How do you both honor your anger and rage and not hold on to it, but also not get so consumed by it that all you're doing is a primal scream and nothing else?
Yeah.
I ask easy questions with no loaded answers.
It's so important to talk about, though, because anger tells us that something is wrong. And so, of course, people that are in targeted communities like ourselves are going to get angry because there's a lot out there that's wrong and that dehumanizes us. So we're going to feel it, and we have to feel it. I think as a yoga community, or communities, I like to say, because I don't think that there's one unified community. I think we have to make room for anger. One of my students last week was saying that when she holds it in and doesn't say it, then there's a war happening inside of her, right? And that she holds that instead of other people letting it be held collectively. But when we hold it collectively, then we allow that one person to step out of pain and allow the rest of us to use our practice and step into discomfort, which is so important. And then hold racism collectively, hold the impact of immigration policies for the last 150 years collectively, the pain of that, rather than let it just be stuck in one body, heart, mind. And then we can transform it. We can use, some of us are going to be more resourced, some of us are going to be more triggered, and collectively we can move through it. Whereas if we're expecting to just be calm and good with each other all the time, it's not possible, right? Like being intimate with other human beings, it's incredibly complicated, and we're not being our whole selves if conflict doesn't emerge. I often, when I enter into new friendships, I'm just like, when is it going to come? Like, inevitably something's going to happen, and how are we going to be when it comes up? It's inevitable. So then for people that are targets of injustice, I think we need to get really good at our discharge practices to realize when we're angry, to again let it move through our body in whatever ways. Indigenous people all over the world have practices to move that energy, and to utilize that. And then once that energy, for me, like once the heat has left my body, once it's like, it no longer feels like urgent, like I have to send this email right now, then to allow myself to be back, to share space again and just see what emerges and get curious and offer up my voice as a gift that I can bring to the space, not as like an opportunity to show someone who's wrong, or put someone in their place, but like, wow, I see some qualities of white supremacy arising in my yoga studio. Oh, how can we transform this collectively? So it's not pointing fingers. There's no one that's like blamed for it, but we're all responsible for it.
Well, this brings up a really, I think, important thing, and I think this has come with age for me. But I feel like young activists, and some older ones, it's all over the map, but there is this emphasis on being outraged and offended.
Yeah.
Rather than what you're saying is, wow, I see this thing coming up here. And instead of getting stuck in, I'm just going to be offended and outraged and I'm going to outwoke you, to say, oh, hey, have you considered how this policy might make certain people feel? It just feels so much more proactive. That's not to say that we shouldn't do our very best not to address when we feel that sense of offense or outrage, but just not get stuck there. And I feel like so much of activism right now is stuck. It's stuck in like screaming at people instead of calmly listening, as you're describing, like if white supremacy stuff is coming up at the studio, like what can we do to look at that and grow from it and heal it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a developmental phase that anyone becoming politically active goes through where like you realize that like there's so much injustice in the world and you're just starting to see it. And so like you can't imagine that it would continue to happen if everyone was seeing it. And so you feel compelled to like show everyone all the time. It's right there, right there, right there, right there. I often think of my poor mother, and when I was becoming an activist in my young 20s, I would like everything she did. I think I was critical of like using the dryer. I was like, that's using electricity. Don't you know that like that's coming from oil and like oil is limited and it's leading to climate change. So I would like I would hang my clothes on the line out of this place of anger. And you know, she's just trying to do her laundry and like move through life. So I think that anger and that rage, especially of young people, is so important. And young people have been at the forefront of every social movement that I know of, because they are sensitive to what's not right. And that is a tool. Yeah. And we need to embrace that as progressives, as a yoga community, as activists, as, you know, people that want the world to change and be full of love and respect and truth, and not hatred and intolerance, but kind of hold it lightly. And you know that like, yes, you're seeing something wrong. That's a gift. The urgency you feel like it is urgent. And I've learned through my spiritual practice that when things are urgent, we have to slow down, because otherwise we're going to bulldoze, steamroll, and cause more harm.
Yeah. Things are changing. I think this is where age comes in and helps a little bit. Like in my lifetime, as a gay man, I came out. I started developing like into a sexual being that I was aware of right at the start of the AIDS crisis. Gay marriage was like that wasn't even on the radar for activists even. I mean, I remember when Vermont did civil unions and it was like, oh my God, we've achieved so much. Harvey Milk was murdered. I remember him being assassinated. And so and trans rights and gender identity, it just wasn't even on the radar. And I'm 50. So in 50 years, like there's been this immense change, but in the moment, it feels like that sense of urgency, and it's not that urgency isn't there, and I would love to wave a magic wand, but the ability to take that breath and say, we're going through a process here, and it's going to be on, it might not be on your time, and it gives you the space to sort of step back and breathe and say, okay, what's the next best step? Where do we go from here? How do we take this a little bit further?
Right.
So I want to ask you a question about something that you brought up in one of our email exchanges. And I don't know as I have a good answer for this myself, and I don't know as you do. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But since you brought it up, I thought I'd bring it into the podcast. And that is, we are both Caucasian. And non-Indian, non-Hindu, at least not by birth. Mm-hmm. I don't know what your faith tradition is, but I don't identify as Hindu. And yoga, of course, comes from India. It is not synonymous with Hinduism, but closely related to Hinduism and Indian culture. And there's a tremendous amount of cultural appropriation going on in yoga, and I'm very mindful of the fact that I am part of that. Mm. And I also know that I feel like the world is a better place because I teach yoga. That yoga isn't just for Indians or people who identify as Hindu or whatever. And I mean, I think most of the gurus have said that. The gurus are the ones that brought it to the West. But finding that balance of how do we honor this tradition that gave us yoga and own it and make it our own personal practice. Yours looks different than mine and so on. But also like recognize that it's sort of crude to put statues of deities and you don't even know their name or their backstory all over the place just as a decoration. I don't know. I don't know where I draw the line even. I know the line has changed for me personally over time. I'm wondering how you navigate that as an activist who's concerned about things like cultural appropriation.
Audio got a little bit in and out, so but I heard that it's like questions about cultural appropriation, given that we're a couple of white teachers, not growing up Hindu. Yeah. It's so important to talk about and grapple with. One of my practices is to look towards what South Asian teachers of yoga are saying at any given moment, especially those who are politicized, so towards Anjali Rao and Susanna Barkataki and Tejal Patel and Jaisal Parikh and so many South Asian teachers right now, and what they are asking for, similar to being an ally to Black folks in this country. We need to look towards like what are they requesting of us? What are they asking us to do at this moment? So that's my first practice is to look to their leadership and try to heed as much as I can. And a lot of what I find them saying is to learn the ins and outs of different stories before we share them, to learn the meaning of different deities before we post them on our walls or websites, to learn how to treat them respectfully, and what is considered disrespectful coming from India. I also hear them, inviting us to get discerning about like how the Hindu right in India is taking up and claiming yoga practice to the detriment of Muslim folks and Dalit people and queer folks. I get discerning about that. So things like International Yoga Day that Narendra Modi brought about, he was being really strategic in that moment because he knew that white folks in the U.S. and Europe wouldn't know where he's coming from and how he's trying to claim and use yoga in that moment. It was a political move for him. But most of us didn't know because most of us don't learn about the political history or current context in India. And he was banking on that. And now we do yoga in Times Square on International Yoga Day and think that it's totally politically neutral, and it's not. Because at the same time, in places and sites in India, they're doing International Yoga Day on desecrated Muslim temples, right? So the invitation to like know the political context that the practice of yoga comes out of, and to like be really devoted to the study of it much more than the teaching of the history. I don't feel like it's my place to teach the history because it would take me a lifetime to understand. Whereas my South Asian comrades, it's part of their family trajectories that they've grown up with. They can speak about partition. They can speak about British colonization. They can speak about the Indus Valley cultures, thousands of years ago when yoga was born. So those are some of my practices.
That is not something that... I was just going to say, that's not something you grew up maybe learning about, but it's something you could certainly study.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's essential. And I wish that our yoga teacher trainings had a much more depth of yoga history than they do. Because I get people, I think because a good part of my work is talking about the philosophy of yoga. Somehow like the asana stuff gets put over here, and it's okay for white people to do that, but if you dip into the philosophy and the meditation and everything, then it's all of a sudden cultural appropriation. And I have really tried in the teacher trainings I lead and everything to really contextualize everything, to talk about the history, to talk about the Indus Valley, to talk about the Vedas, to talk about how yoga paralleled what is today called Hinduism and then split up, I go into a lot of detail on that because I think it's important, not that you need to become Hindu, but just that you understand, like if you're going to be Jewish or Christian, understanding the history of how that faith evolved and the cultures that helped to build it to what it is today. Yeah. And I've had people freak out on me just for even talking about it, and I'm like, well, I'm no worse than Wikipedia. I mean, I think there's a both and there to talk about it, to have the courage to talk about it, and also to know that like you're not going to have the full picture. You're just not, and so bringing a humility to that.
Yeah. So we need to wrap this up. I could talk for days to you, and I would love to bring you back in for different conversations. I really like your work, and I think you're really contributing a lot of important stuff to the conversation. One of the things that has been heartbreaking for me for many years, and it's nice to see it slowly starting to change, again, not on my timeline, but slowly starting, is how yoga has really in the West been this upper middle class white thing for healthy people. And everybody else is sort of like pushed out and not made to feel welcome. Rarely do you see a teacher that doesn't fit that sort of stereotypical mold. And so I think the conversations that are happening right now about making yoga more inclusive, and you're a huge part of that, are just really, really important. Important that we see different kinds of yoga teachers out there, as sort of like, it's hard to be what you can't see. Yeah. And also just like, what are the subtle things we can do as me as a white guy? Like, how can I make my classes feel more welcoming to a person of color or a trans person or whoever? So thank you for helping me and helping the yoga world. Before we wrap up, though, if there's anything we didn't get to that you think is really important that we touch on, I'm going to give you an open mic for a minute. And also, if you could weave in, I will post your website and a link to your book on Amazon and stuff in the show notes. But if you could just state that stuff as well, in case people don't have access to the notes.
Sure. I think one of the important things at this moment in yoga is ensuring that the yamas and the niyamas are at the forefront of our practice, right? They're listed as the first couple of practices of yoga for a reason. They're the ethical practices and then the internal practices to make sure that we're in alignment. And the yamas are all about right relationship and, being harmless in the world. Like that counteracts so much of the harm we see being caused in the world, practicing truthfulness when there's so many lies, and like, what is truth being called into question in the last 5 years? And non-stealing, right? I think of my practice of Asteya as countering the impacts of cultural appropriation and, making sure that I dedicate a portion of my income back to the people of India because they gave me the practice to begin with. That feels like an essential part of my Asteya practice. Watching how I use my sexual energy. Pretty much every yoga lineage right now has, there's some history of sexual violence in it. And so how can we transform our yoga lineages in the next 50, 100 years to where that's like a distant memory, that doesn't occur anymore? I think it's a lot about like conversations like this where we're in horizontal relationship with each other and accountable to one another. So I hope that the yamas and the niyamas become more essential in our practice, right? When you say, I do yoga, I hope that comes to mean so much more that I'm committed to non-harm. I'm committed to using my sexual energy responsibly, more than like I bring my body into a downward dog or a crow pose. Like, I don't care about that, but I really deeply care about our practice of the yamas and niyamas. My website.
Go ahead.
My website is jacobyballard.net. If you want to follow up with me, I teach live classes and virtual classes, and there's recordings if you want to study with me, mentorship for yoga teachers. And I'm just really grateful for this conversation, Darren.
Oh, awesome. You are just amazing. And, I just, as you were speaking a minute ago, I would love to have a conversation about ethics in yoga and specifically around sexual violence. And I think so much is the guru-disciple relationship. While there's something to be said for having a teacher, there's also something to be said to having a teacher that is accountable, that answers to someone, that where, if you go to your doctor, your psychotherapist, anyone, and they hit on you, they get fired. Hopefully. There's some sort of accountability there. Hopefully. It's not perfect, but there's something. And you don't see that in the guru-disciple relationship. You never question the guru. Right. And I think that is an extremely toxic and dangerous thing that we need to look at. And I would love to chat with you about that. Jacoby Ballard, it is so wonderful. Check out his website, his new book, A Queer Dharma, and I will put links to everything in the show notes. And we will definitely have you back on in the very near future to talk about all the stuff that we didn't get to, which is like 95% of your book. So, thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you, Darren.